That's kind of a thing you kind of have to keep to your own self because it's a fragile feeling and you put it out there, somebody will kill it. So it's best to keep that all inside.
Picture this. The sun sets over Malibu's tangled coast, where Bob Dylan, now 84 and famously silent on most things, finally decides to speak. But not about politics, not about awards, no. Today, it's personal. For the first time in decades, Dylan is opening the vault on someone who was once his shadow, his rival, his equal, and his bitter mirror, Paul Simon. This wasn't just a passing jab or a cryptic lyric. Dylan's revelation was like peeling off decades of dust from an old wound, exposing a Cold War between two of the most complex songwriters in American music history. Behind the harmonies and guitar strings lay jealousy, creative theft accusations, love triangles, and unresolved anger that had long been buried under polite interviews and public smiles. To fans, it's shocking, but to those who were watching closely, it was inevitable. Think of Greenwich Village in the early 1960s, coffee houses echoing with protest songs, denim jackets, and idealistic youth crammed shoulder to shoulder. Bob Dylan was already becoming a legend. And then came Paul Simon. Precise, ambitious, and deeply obsessed with songcraft. But unlike Dylan's cryptic verses and gritty rebel image, Simon wanted perfection. He was sharp, calculated. Even at 23, he had the vibe of a man who couldn't stand being second best. Behind the scenes, there was friction from the start. Dylan found Simon's style too polished, too pleasing to the establishment. Meanwhile, Simon thought Dylan got too much credit for his rough edges. Folk messiah, he supposedly once scoffed to a friend. More like a mumbling poet with a lucky timing. That resentment only deepened as Dylan's star rose faster, more wildly, more mythically. Paul Simon may have had the sound of silence, but Dylan had a revolution. The stage had been set, not for friendship, but for a rivalry charged with pride, envy, and quiet spite. Paul Simon's most famous feud wasn't with Dylan, it was with the angel-voiced Art Garfunkel. To the world, they were poetry and harmony. Behind the curtain, a boiling pot of control, resentment, and ego. Simon always felt he carried the intellectual weight of the duo, writing the lyrics, sculpting the melodies, but Garfunkel got the applause. His golden vocals became the centerpiece, while Simon quietly fumed in the shadows. Their breakup in 1970 was seismic, but what fans didn't see was how personal the split became. When Garfunkel took an acting role in Catch-22 without telling Simon, it wasn't just betrayal, it was war. Simon never truly forgave him. Their brief reunions were tense, transactional, and filled with bitterness.
If the common perception of me out there in the public eye was that I was either a drunk or I was a sicko.
One close aide once described their chemistry as frost in springtime. You probably heard of Paul Simon's on and off whirlwind romance with Star Wars actress Carrie Fisher. What many don't know is how emotionally devastating that relationship really was. They married in 1983, but love quickly turned into obsession, jealousy, and psychological warfare. Fisher's battle with addiction and mental illness clashed with Simon's need for control and order. They divorced in less than a year, but couldn't stay away. The toxic pull dragged on for years, full of fights, passion, and painful reunions. Their love story wasn't poetic, it was chaotic. Friends often said their connection was magnetic but poisonous, like two wires sparking fire in a dark room. Simon's perfectionism didn't win him many allies in the music business. Behind the scenes, producers and session musicians often complained about his cold demeanor and extreme demands. He re-recorded single lines dozens of times. He was known for firing people without warning. Engineers said working with him could feel like walking on broken glass. And then there were the critics. While Dylan was praised for being raw and real, Simon was often accused of being overcalculated, even sterile. Reviews for his albums like Hearts and Bones were mixed, hitting his ego hard. Simon began obsessing over reviews, once reportedly calling a journalist to debate a 3-star rating at midnight. Paul Simon kept much of his family life in the shadows, but that didn't mean it was calm. His relationship with his brother Eddie Simon, who also worked in music, was strained for years. They tried to collaborate on business ventures but clashed frequently over creative direction and financial decisions. Eddie once described the dynamic as two captains trying to steer one ship and always heading in opposite directions. Their disagreements were so deep that at one point they reportedly went years without speaking directly. There were also reports of tension with his children as he grew older. Simon's high expectations reportedly created distance, especially with his sons, who struggled to follow in his massive musical footsteps. Insiders described him as a father who loved deeply but expressed it through structure, not softness. He pushed them to be excellent, but never gave them room to fail. The shadow of his genius left little space for their own identities. His first marriage to Peggy Harper ended quietly but left emotional scars. Their son, Harper Simon, pursued music himself, but often faced comparisons he couldn't outrun. Interviews hinted at pressure and emotional absence, a father consumed by the studio and haunted by legacy. Even in later years, as Simon settled into semi-retirement, family gatherings were said to be formal, structured, and brief. The warmth expected in a family dinner was replaced by schedules and rehearsed small talk. Some close friends claimed Simon struggled with vulnerability even behind closed doors. Always thinking, always revising, even in moments meant for stillness. In the end, the man who wrote some of the most intimate lyrics of the 20th century found true intimacy hard to access in his own home. The studio may have been his sanctuary, but it was also his escape from expectations, from connection, and from the complicated, unresolved ties of family. As new artists rose in the 2000s and 2010s, Paul Simon didn't exactly welcome them with open arms. He was openly dismissive of some modern genres, criticizing hip-hop for its sampling and mocking certain pop trends as empty noise. This didn't sit well with young musicians, and Simon found himself increasingly isolated from the evolving industry. He clashed publicly with acts like Kanye West and even questioned the songwriting talents of younger stars like Ed Sheeran. At a music panel in 2014, he reportedly rolled his eyes when a speaker praised modern rap as the new poetry, saying afterward in private that people have forgotten what real songwriting is. He once refused to attend a music awards ceremony where a younger pop act was being honored, allegedly stating, "It's not that I'm against youth, I'm against mediocrity in disguise." Though never fully quoted in public, stories like this circulated in industry circles, casting him as a bitter icon resisting time itself. Tensions grew not just musically, but ideologically. Simon lamented the rise of social media-driven fame and questioned whether modern musicians could truly understand the soul of their craft. Younger artists, in turn, began to see Simon not as a hero, but as a gatekeeper, someone too proud to pass the torch. While some still respected his achievements, the generational divide widened. Paul Simon had become a lone figure, a man whose unmatched legacy now clashed loudly with a cultural shift he refused to understand or embrace. Paul Simon remains a musical genius, but behind the accolades, behind the timeless songs, lies a man haunted by insecurity, obsessed with legacy, and scarred by decades of broken relationships and bitter rivalries. He was a man who couldn't let go of grudges, of control, of the need to be seen as the smartest man in the room. Even his closest collaborators described working with him as a mix of awe and exhaustion. He scrutinized every note, second-guessed every harmony, and often revised songs long after they were finished. The need to dominate creatively wasn't just professional, it was personal. Simon's obsession with perfection created a wall between himself and others. That wall protected him from vulnerability, but it also kept out real intimacy. Relationships broke, friendships collapsed, and trust eroded under the weight of his expectation. His music connected to millions, but the man behind it often felt disconnected from everyone around him. Bob Dylan's words only confirmed what many insiders had whispered for years. Paul Simon, while brilliant, was also deeply wounded. A man who never truly felt loved for who he was. A man who measured success not in joy, but in perfection. A man who feared irrelevance more than failure. And a man whose sharpest conflicts weren't with the world, but with himself. In the end, Paul Simon carved out a legacy that few could touch. His music is etched into the fabric of modern sound, and his lyrics still echo through the years. But brilliance came with a price. For every standing ovation, there was a broken friendship. For every perfect melody, a silent feud. For every hit record, a sleepless night, wondering if it was enough. Simon's story is not just about music. It's about the weight of genius, the ache of pride, and the human cost of perfection. And now, with Dylan finally shedding light on the darkness beneath that polished surface, the world sees Paul Simon not just as a songwriter, but as a man who spent his life chasing harmony in a world full of discord. His career may be immortal, but his journey was human, messy, painful, and lonely. He stood on the grandest stages, but often walked away alone. He shaped the sounds of generations, but struggled to shape peace within himself. Perhaps that is the paradox of true genius. It creates beauty from chaos, but cannot always escape the chaos within. And as the curtain falls on his public life, what remains is a bittersweet echo, one of a man who gave everything to his art, and paid for it in silence, sorrow, and sacrifice. That, in the end, may be Paul Simon's most haunting melody of all.